Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
This story is called My Mom Married a Mobster. Before I start, I want you all to know that, for reasons that will be obvious, I've changed the names of those involved and will not be revealing my identity. When I was 4 years old, my parents divorced. I wound up in the custody of my mom and wouldn't see or hear from my dad for 30 years, until he showed up at my doorstep unannounced, wanting to reconcile. I told him to take a hike because he never tried to contact me or my mom since he split. My mom stayed single for a few years before she started dating this guy named Vin. Now, Vin was a very big man, the biggest I've seen in my entire life. He was 6'10", 350 pounds of muscle, and had hands so massive that if he went to pet a little cat or something, he'd probably crush it. When I was just shy of my 7th birthday, Vin and my mom got married. Now, my mom is tall herself, standing just a hair above 6 feet, but was not enough to make the kiss at the end of the ceremony seem less awkward. Now, Vin never really told me or my mom what he did for a living. Just said he was a special contractor. Though at the time, I didn't know what it meant. As soon as he and mom were married, we moved from our small 2-bedroom apartment into a large and luxurious 2-story mansion. My mama and I were given free run of the house except for one room on the 2nd floor in the back of the house that Vin called his private study. At first, all seemed well. He bought my mom a new Maserati as a wedding present, got me my first baseball glove, as well as an autographed baseball signed by my favorite Major League Baseball player for my birthday. And on my next birthday, he gave me my half-brother and half-sister, Dominic and Serafina. Man, all seemed fine, except for a few things. My stepfather seemed to keep real strange hours. Every so often, he would get a call from a client, as he called it, in the middle of dinner. And as soon as he hang up the phone, he'd say, "Gotta go. Some business came up." And with that, he put on his custom-made black gloves and leave the house. What was even more strange was that sometimes on Saturday night, at around midnight, I would hear him get up and walk down the hallway and leave the house. I asked my mom about Vin's real odd behavior, but she would dismiss it and just tell me to be thankful for Vin and all he did for us. I remember when I was 12, curiosity got the better of me about the forbidden room and what it had to do with Vin's odd behavior. On that particular night, Vin and my mom went out for dinner and a movie for the anniversary and wouldn't be home until late. I put the twins to bed, read them The Cat in the Hat, and turned out the light. After I closed the door, I made my way to the room in the back of the house. The door to the room looked just like all the other doors in the house. White with a fancy brass doorknob, but right across the top was a sign that read, "Private." I opened it and went inside. Of course, after I jimmied my way in, the room was dark and I felt around for a light switch. Man, I won't never forget what I saw. All the walls were covered with newspapers and Polaroid photos. All the newspapers had headlines like "Missing Mobster Found in River," "Strangler Strikes Again," "Lucky Louie, Lucky No More," and "Another strangling victim has police baffled." There were also the photos of people, men and women, all looking like they'd been strangled by someone strong as their necks were crushed. I couldn't believe it. Even though my mind was screaming at me the awful truth, like, yo, your stepdad's a freaking murderer. And if the newspapers and the photos didn't convince me, then what I saw next sure did. I spotted a trunk on the other side of the room. I went over and opened it. Inside was a crazy assortment of things. Watches, makeup, accessories, a pair of glasses, a Scorpio medallion, a lucky rabbit's foot, some rings, and a dozen purses and wallets. I went through some of the wallets, but they still had the driver license and oh my goodness. With some of the licenses, I was able to match the photos on them to the Polaroids. Looking back, I probably should have called the police or better yet the FBI, but being 12, I didn't think they'd believe me. In my mind, I could just hear them saying something like, "Yeah, sure, kid. And the president is actually a space alien." So I came to the only other conclusion I could think of. That Saturday, I pretended to go to sleep. When I was sure the coast was clear, I snuck out of my room and down the hall to where Vin and my mom slept. Now the doors in the house all open outward, so I positioned myself so that when a door opened, I wouldn't be seen. Soon I heard Vinny get up. I listened as he got ready to go out, and soon he opened the door and walked out. He was dressed in a long black trench coat with his gloves were hanging out of his pocket and his wide brimmed black fedora. As he made his way to the stairs, I followed quietly behind him. Soon he got to the top landing and started putting his gloves on. While he was doing this, I sprang into action. At that time, I was 6'2" and still growing. I came up behind him and gave him a mighty push. Vinny was caught off guard and pitched forward. He fell straight down, banging his head against the wall and steps. Finally, he hit the floor at the bottom with a big thud. I looked down and I saw that Big Vinny was dead. His neck was broken and bent at a crazy angle. I breathed a sigh of relief and went back to bed. I woke up to the sound of my mom crying. It took a moment for me to realize why. I played dumb and came out asking, "What's wrong?" call 911. Your stepdaddy's dead," my mom said. I did, and soon a police and ambulance was at our house. It took 4 paramedics just to put Vinny's body in the back of the ambulance. The police ruled the cause of death as an accident. A simple case of trip and fall, they said. Afterwards, my mom inherited Vinny's fortune and collected his $750,000 life insurance policy. She never got remarried after that. And when it came time for me to go to college, I felt bad about leaving my mom all alone in that big house with the twins. So I usually spent a few weekends a month visiting, you know, just to help her out a bit. One night during my junior year, I came home from classes and saw there was a message on the answering machine. I pushed the playback button to listen. It was my mama, and she sounded flustered. "Hi, honey, this is Mom. Call me back as soon as you get this. It's urgent." I picked up the phone and called her. "Hey, Mom, what's going on? Everything okay?" She said, "Well, not exactly. You see, I figured out you killed your stepfather, Vinny, all those years before. I stood as still as a rock. How did she know what I did? Was I going to go to jail? She seemed just to have she must have sensed my uneasiness through the phone. She said, "Don't worry, son. I won't tell. I know why you did what you did. And while I don't approve of it, I do understand," she said. You do? I asked. She said, "Yes, I went into Vin's private study for the first time this morning after Dom and Serafina left for school." I paused for a moment and asked her, "So what did you do with all that stuff? You just now going in there, Mom?" I always wanted to ask her about the private room, but I always figured that she probably didn't want to talk about it, and that the truth would be too terrifying for her. She told me, "I burned all the newspapers and photos in the fireplace and had the servants bury the trunk in the back garden," she said. "You didn't take it to the police or to the feds?" I asked in surprise. "Of course not," she said. "Some things are better left buried, literally and metaphorically." After a brief moment of silence, my mom spoke up. "So, will I see you this weekend?" she asked. Sure. I'll be there Friday night," she said. "I love you." The name of this story is The Apartment. I grew up in a poor family during the 1990s. My dad, who had made some bad decisions in his earlier years, worked at a Greasy Spoon diner next to a highway overpass that barely paid minimum wage. And my mom worked as a parking lot attendant. Between the two of them, they earned just enough to pay rent to our tiny one-bedroom apartment in a real rough part of town. Groceries and clothes for me that were always bought at the Salvation Army store down the street. In '98, when I was 6, things looked just bleak. My dad had lost his job at the diner, and building inspectors discovered mold and other problems with our building. I remember my mom crying, thinking that we would be reduced to living out of our beat-up '79 Oldsmobile that my dad had bought at a shady used car lot. However, things quickly changed when my dad's best friend since childhood, Mr. Robertson, contacted us. Mr. Robertson was a successful businessman who owned a property management company called Robertson and Associates Property Management Group, and he owned several rental properties. Mr. Robertson had just renovated an old apartment building that had previously been public housing till a new baseball stadium was built nearby as part of an urban renewal initiative led to higher property values. He offered my dad a job as the maintenance man for the new property and a chance to live in a special 2-bedroom unit, rent-free. My dad took it. I mean, have a place of your own that you didn't have to pay for and a steady job? Man, what's not to like? When I went with my dad to meet up with Mr. Robertson, I saw the place for the first time. I could tell that the building must have been about 100 years old, despite the facelift and new windows and everything. As we went through the building, I couldn't help but think, man, this must be what people mean when they say swank. This place is amazing. It's even carpet in the hallways. This place was built around 1900. At the time, it was an apartment for the rich, Mr. Robertson said. Every 2 units back then were actually each one big apartment, some even containing 4 bedrooms. Though after the stock market crash, the place went through some changes. It was a flop house for a while, a whorehouse, and then a mission before it just became another slum apartment. That was until they started on a new stadium, he said. Ho bought this beauty at the right time, he said, chuckling to himself and patting a newly papered wall. Our apartment was on the ground floor towards the back, just past the staircase. Let me explain the layout to you. If you walked in, you would be in the living room / dining room area. Straight ahead was the kitchen with sliding glass back door that led out to the carport. To your right, there were 2 hallways. The one to your right led to a dead-end wall with the door to my room on the left. And if you went down the hallway to the left, you would see the door to my parents' bedroom on your right, the door to the kitchen to your left, and the bathroom straight ahead. We soon got settled in and people started moving in. My dad was soon busy, fixing stuff, replacing burnt-out light bulbs, doing routine maintenance, stuff like that. It was an old building after all. After a month of living there, I had my first encounter with that haunted building. It was a few minutes to midnight when I got up to go to the kitchen. I was thirsty and decided to have a glass of milk. I had just poured myself a glass and was about to have a sip when I looked up and saw a man. The man was dressed in an old-looking black tuxedo and standing in the shadows. I thought he had broken in, and I was about to scream when he stepped out of the shadows and I saw his face for the first time. At that point, the scream died in my throat. The man's face was skeletal with skin that was white like the Joker. Only he didn't have any lips and his eyes were just two black holes. I tried to scream again, but the man or whatever he was just raised a bony finger to his mouth and whispered, "Shh." I dropped my glass and ran into my parents' room and woke them up. I told them that I just saw a man in the kitchen and my parents got up. My dad grabbed a hammer from his tool belt and my mama grabbed a table lamp. They went into the kitchen and saw nothing. My parents searched the place and didn't find anyone. Nothing was taken and both doors were locked. My dad was mad that I woke him up and made a mess. And I told him, "But Dad, man, I saw him. He was dressed in a tuxedo and his bony white face," and my mom cut me off. "Look, you were probably just having a nightmare," she said softly. "Your mama right," my daddy said real sternly. "Now clean up this mess you done made and get back in the bed before I whoop your butt." I did as I was told. You know, I didn't really like getting a whooping, so. A week before Christmas, I saw that man again. I had gotten up to go get a peek at my presents, which I knew would be in the living room closet. I stopped believing in Santa when I was 5, and I knew that all the games and the toys weren't made by elves in the North Pole. They were made by people in factories owned by corporations and men in suits. I looked at my parents and I was about to sneak off to bed when I saw the man again. He still looked the same and he was walking through the kitchen into the living room. I ran to my room and hid under the covers till morning. After that, I did my best to avoid the kitchen at night. Part of me doubted as to whether or not I actually saw the scary looking man. But any doubt I had soon went out the window on New Year's Eve. On New Year's, Mr. Robinson and his wife came over to watch the celebration, live from Times Square. I convinced my mom and dad to let me stay up and watch the ball drop. As we were watching, it came close to midnight. We had the lights turned off so my mom could sleep. Just as Dick Clark was going on about the new ball, I heard Mrs. Robinson scream. "Chill out, dear. It's just a new ball," her husband said. "No, not that," she said. "Look," and she pointed. My dad and Mr. Robinson and I looked, and sure enough, it was that man, dressed in his tuxedo, looking as dead as ever. He walked into the living room and we all sat in fear. The skeletal man stopped a few feet from us, looking over at the TV as if he was studying it, then vanished. My dad got up and turned on the lights. What was that?" he asked. Mr. Robinson just sat staring for a moment before he spoke. The man I bought this place from said the downstairs apartment was haunted. But I didn't think it was real, he said real sheepishly. "What are you talking about?" my dad said. Mr. Robinson sighed. "Supposedly, about 90 years ago, a rich young couple lived here. The man was a drunk and a philanderer who didn't treat his wife very well. One night his wife finally had enough, and when her husband tried to sneak in through the back after having another one of his drunken affairs, she shot him just as he entered the living room." My dad just stood there dumbfounded. Mrs. Robinson suggested that she and Mr. Robinson leave, as they would probably have to pay the babysitter overtime if they stayed out much longer. So they left. Not long after that, my parents had a priest come over and perform an exorcism and bless the whole apartment. After that, we weren't bothered by any more sightings of that ghost. My parents still live in that apartment, and my dad got his AA in property management and helps Mr. Robinson with the management of his other rental properties. As for me, even though I live in a brand new house of my own, I still avoid the kitchen at night, even if I'm hungry. This story is called I Used to Drive Taxi. I work for a taxi company called Empire Cab Company. I've been driving for them for about 8 years now. For the first time, I drove what is called the night cab. Basically, it's an all-night cab service that went from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I've always been a night owl, and the pay wasn't too bad. So for me, it was a perfect fit. That was until I met the lady in black. It was late September, and it had been a dead night. I had only 2 fares that entire night. One was a young businessman who had too much to drink and puked when he got out of his apartment. And the second was a 30-some-year-old lady who barely spoke a word of English and had a thick Eastern European accent, who was going to her job as a cleaner at a hospital. None of them tipped me well. In fact, the foreign lady tipped me some weird coins from her home country. I tried to tell her she gave me the wrong currency, but she already had run into the building. I drove off ticked off and swearing to myself that if I saw her again, I'd just keep driving. So I'd been driving and I hadn't picked up anybody for several hours, when just a little after 1 o'clock in the morning, I saw a dark figure flagging me down. I was in a pretty nice neighborhood, so I started to slow down. And as I drew closer, I could see it was a woman. But she wasn't like any woman I'd seen. Man, this woman was 7 feet tall. She seemed young, like in her early 20s. She was dressed in a black dress that just barely reached her knees and this black cloak with a hood that covered the top half of her face. I pulled over and she got in. I said, "Where to?" The address she gave me was one of the historic old mansions located within this large park. So I started to meet her and started driving. As I drove off, I asked her, "What you doing out so late?" She said she had to attend some personal business and that it went longer than she expected. When I heard that, I instantly thought I picked up some glorified hooker working for some escort service, and I was just taking her to her next client. Probably some nasty old rich man who probably ain't gotten laid since the Wright brothers invented the airplane. When I reached the park, I slowed down. The speed limit on the road was 25 miles an hour. This was a tricky road. It'd be straight for a while, then a whole bunch of sharp bends for a while, before it straightened out only to do the same thing over again. Man, whoever designed the roads in this park must have smoked some bad granola or something, man. Anyway, I was driving when the lady spoke. "I'll give you a good tip if you go faster," she said. I figured there'd be no harm if I went a little bit over, and I could use a good tip, so I lightly pressed on the accelerator. I took the cab up to 30 miles an hour and thought that was good enough as I was coming to the first series of curves. I navigated the curves and the road became straight again. We just crossed over an old stone bridge when the lady spoke again. "Can you please go a little faster? I'll reward you handsomely if you do." Now this was the longest straight stretch on that road, but I knew there would soon be more curves, but I figured I could slow down once I reached them. So I gunned it up to 35 miles an hour. But not no more than that. But this crazy giant lady wasn't satisfied. "Please, drive faster," she demanded. "Look, lady," I said, "the house you're going to ain't going nowhere. Besides, I'm doing 10 over, it might be a cop or something out here. I'm already risking a speeding ticket as it is." The lady then reached forward and hissed in my ear, "You have a lot more to worry about than just mere mortals in blue uniforms with shiny badges if you don't drive faster." At this point, I didn't care about any big tip. I ain't care about the fare. I went to slam on the brakes and tell that trick to get out, but when I did, instead of stopping, the car sped up. I pumped the brake pedal several times, but the car kept going faster. At this point, I was freaking out, man. I thought there was a leak in a brake line and I had lost all my brake fluid or something. As the cab whipped around the next curve at 60 miles an hour, I heard the lady laughing with evil delight and yelling, "Faster! Faster! Faster!" When we got to another straight stretch, I was nearly doing 80. Man, I was flying. I turned to look back at my passenger and I saw her true form. Her face was no longer that beautiful young woman, but warped and demonic looking. Her teeth were small and sharp and her eyes were glowing a bright yellow. Not only that, her previously delicate hands were now gnarled and claw-like. I screamed and tried to open the door to jump out the door, but it wouldn't open. The demon lady kept laughing and shouting, "Faster!" over and over. I looked back at the road and saw we were coming to an intersection. Looming in the distance, I saw a garbage truck. Knowing I couldn't stop, I swerved to the right and crashed the cab into a tree. The last thing I heard before I blacked out was that monster lady laughing, like she just heard the funniest joke in the world. I woke up in the hospital, and as it turns out, the man driving the garbage truck saw the crash and called 911. He also claimed he saw the figure of a tall woman leave the car and disappear into the bushes. But when he went to follow her, she was nowhere to be found. Man, I was tore up bad. I broke both my legs, my pelvis, cracked a few ribs, fractured my collarbone, broke my right arm, and even suffered a fractured skull. I had 2 visitors that day. The first was the police who wanted to know what happened. I simply just told them I lost control of the vehicle when the brakes failed. And in a way, that was true. But I didn't tell them the truth about my passenger. They wouldn't have believed me, and they probably would think I'd been taking some dope or something. I just told them she was a passenger who freaked out and left the scene of the accident. The other visitor I had was my boss. He asked me how I was doing. Man, aside from being bandaged up like a mummy, and after having the worst night of my life, I guess I'm pretty good, I said. My boss chuckled slightly, but then he got really serious. "You saw her, didn't you? The lady in black?" I said, "Yeah. What do you know about her?" "She's a kind of urban legend among the taxi drivers," he said. "Stories go back to when taxis first appeared in the city. No one really knows who she is or if she was ever human, but there are a few theories though. But what the taxi drivers in the city agree on is that her main goal is to cause death to any cab driver that picks her up. You know, you were one of the few drivers who met the lady and lived to tell about it, he said. I said, well, what's this lady beef with the taxi drivers anyway, man? My boss shrugged. Who knows for sure? Just get some rest, and when you're ready to come back to work, man, I'll put you on a day shift if that's all right with you. I told him that was fine, and he left. A week later, I was discharged and my boo Sheila brought me home. A few days after, I was at home resting on the couch when Sheila came in after work. Honey, you got a package in the mail, she said. Who is from? I asked. I don't know, there's no return address. The package was a small cardboard box. I carefully opened it up, and inside was a large wad of cash. When Sheila and I counted it, there was $30,000. That'd be enough to, man, pay for some of these medical bills, but, you know, I think I might go and party with this money. Goodness. At the bottom of the box was a folded up piece of paper, and when I read it, I nearly fell off the couch. On it had a note that read, "Thank you for a delightful ride in your cab. Here's that big tip I promise. Let's do it again sometime. I'll even pay a bigger tip next time. Yours truly, the lady in black." If she gonna tip me more than $30,000, I think I'll go ahead and take that ride. You can put me back on the night shift.
Chilling tales for dark nights.